She sat in a café in Edinburgh, watching the manuscript get handed back to her across a small wooden table. The literary agent, someone whose name she'd probably forget within the year, had read 3 chapters, maybe 4. The response was polite, measured, and final. Children don't read books this long anymore. The market isn't there. It wouldn't sell. She nodded, said thank you, put the pages back in her bag. She didn't argue, she didn't pitch harder, she just left. And honestly, to be clear, this is something on a whole and other level, so stay tuned. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. That was 1995. Joanne Rowling, who'd later shorten her name to JK because her publisher thought boys wouldn't read books written by women, was 30 years old. She was living in a 1-bedroom flat in Leith with her infant daughter. The heating barely worked. She was on welfare. Her marriage had collapsed a year earlier in Portugal, where she'd been teaching English. She came back to Scotland because her sister lived there, and she had nowhere else to go. The manuscript was called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She'd been working on it for 5 years. Some of it was written in cafes because the flat was cold, and her daughter would fall asleep in the stroller while she ordered 1 coffee and made it last 2 hours. She had no job, no income beyond government assistance, and now no agent. What followed wasn't dramatic, it was repetitive. She kept sending the manuscript out, agent after agent, publisher after publisher. The rejections came back with different words but the same message: not interested, too long, too niche. Kids want shorter books, fantasy doesn't sell, the market's saturated. One rejection suggested she take a writing course. She didn't have money for a writing course. She kept a folder of the rejection letters, not because she was collecting motivation or planning some future revenge fantasy. She just needed to track who she'd already sent it to so she wouldn't accidentally send it twice and look desperate. Though she was desperate, she just didn't want to look it. This went on for a year. A full year of writing query letters in the evening after her daughter went to sleep, of checking the mail, of opening envelopes that started with "thank you for your submission, but..." Her friends were sympathetic at first, then quietly concerned, then some of them annoyed. One asked her gently if maybe she should focus on getting a teaching job instead of chasing this book thing. She didn't have a good answer to that. Because the truth was, she didn't know if the book was good. She thought it was, but 12 agents disagreed, and they were the professionals. They knew the market. She was a single mother on welfare who'd written a 90,000-word children's book that apparently no one wanted. The rational thing would have been to move on. She didn't. In 1996, a small literary agent named Christopher Little agreed to represent her. Not because he loved the book, he hadn't even read it yet. His assistant had pulled it from the slush pile and told him it was worth a look. He read it, liked it, signed her. That felt like progress. It wasn't. Because now the rejections were coming from publishers instead of agents. Bigger names, more polite language, same answer. Bloomsbury, Penguin, HarperCollins, they all passed. Little kept submitting. Rowling kept waiting. Months went by. She got a part-time teaching position. It helped with rent. It didn't help with the feeling that she'd wasted 5 years writing something no one would ever read. Then in August 1996, Bloomsbury offered her a deal. The advance was £1,500. For context, that's roughly £3,000 today. It would not cover her rent for the year. It would not let her quit her teaching job. It would not change her life. Her editor at Bloomsbury, a man named Barry Cunningham, told her very kindly that she should not expect to make money writing children's books. He suggested she get a day job, permanently. She said okay. Because what else do you say? The book came out in June 1997. The print run was 500 copies. Most of those went to libraries. It didn't sell out immediately. It didn't make headlines. There was no buzz. But it got reviewed, And the reviews were good, better than good. A few called it exceptional. The Scotsman compared it to Roald Dahl. The Sunday Times said it was the most imaginative debut in years. Kids started reading it, then telling other kids about it. Word spread slowly, not virally, just steadily. By the end of 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone had won the Nestlé Smarties Book Prize. That mattered. It meant bookstores started stocking it. Teachers started recommending it. Parents started buying it. Rowling was still teaching part-time, still living in the same flat, still taking the bus. In 1998, Scholastic bought the U.S. rights for $105,000. That was life-changing money, not generational wealth, not never-work-again money, but enough to stop teaching, enough to write full-time, enough to stop waking up at 3 a.m. wondering if she'd made a massive mistake. The second book, Chamber of Secrets, came out that summer. It debuted at #1 on the UK bestseller list. The third book, Prisoner of Azkaban, sold 68,000 copies in the UK in the first 3 days. By 1999, the first 3 Harry Potter books held the top 3 spots on the New York Times bestseller list simultaneously. The Times had to create a separate children's list because adult fiction authors were complaining. Publishers who'd rejected her started calling. She didn't take the calls. By 2000, Rowling was wealthy. Not just successful, wealthy. The kind of wealth that makes you uncomfortable to talk about because it sounds fake. The books sold in the tens of millions. The film rights sold for 7 figures. Merchandise deals, theme parks, translation rights in 80 languages. Everything became massive in a way that no one, including her, had predicted. She bought a house, then another. She set up a trust for her daughter. She donated millions to charity, particularly to single-parent families and multiple sclerosis research. Her mother had died of MS in 1990, before the first book was finished. She could have retired after the 4th book and never worried about money again. She wrote 3 more. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. She was rejected 12 times, 12, not by amateurs, not by interns, by professional literary agents whose entire job is recognizing marketable stories. They all said no, and even after she got an agent, 9 publishers said no. The publisher who finally said yes told her not to quit her day job. She didn't sell millions of copies in week 1. She sold 500, then a few thousand, then tens of thousands, then millions. It took years for the world to catch up to what she'd written. And during those years, between 1995 and 1998, she had no idea it would work, no guarantee, no insider confirmation that she was onto something. She just kept going, not because she was brave, not because she believed in herself with unshakable confidence, because she didn't know what else to do. The publishing industry likes to frame the Harry Potter story as a Cinderella tale, rags to riches, welfare to billionaire. But that framing hides the math. 5 years to write the first book, 1 year to find an agent, 1 year to find a publisher, 2 years for the book to gain traction. That's 9 years between, I have an idea and this is working. 9 years of hearing no. 9 years of second guessing. 9 years of people asking when she'd get a real job. Most people don't last 9 months. By the time the 7th book came out in 2007, Rowling was the first person to become a billionaire by writing books. The release event for Deathly Hallows was covered like a news story. Bookstores opened at midnight, kids dressed as characters. It sold 11 million copies in 24 hours. She could have written anything after that, and it would have sold. She wrote a crime novel under a fake name, Robert Galbraith, to see if the books were good or if people just bought them because of her name. The book got rejected by publishers, even after everything, even after Harry Potter. A publisher rejected Robert Galbraith. When the book finally came out through a small press, it sold poorly. Then someone leaked that Galbraith was Rowling, and sales exploded. She never said what she thought about that. There's no clean lesson here, no tidy moral. Rowling succeeded because she kept submitting the manuscript, yes, but also because one assistant at one agency pulled it from a pile, because one editor overruled his colleagues, because a few early reviews happened to be positive, because kids told other kids. 1,000 small things had to go right, but none of them would have mattered if she'd stopped after rejection 8, or 10, or 12. She didn't stop because she was certain it would work. She stopped never. The café in Edinburgh where she wrote parts of the first book is now a tourist attraction. People take photos outside. They order coffee and sit at the same tables and try to feel what she felt. But they can't, because what she felt wasn't inspiration. It was rent pressure. It was the embarrassment of explaining to a new acquaintance that yes, she was still working on that book. It was the growing suspicion that maybe everyone else was right and she was wrong. What she felt was the slow, suffocating weight of not knowing if any of it mattered. And then, years later, finding out it did. That manuscript she carried in her bag, the one that got handed back across a table in 1995, has now sold over 600 million copies. The publishers who rejected it don't talk about it much. Rowling doesn't talk about them much either. She just kept the rejection letters, all of them,